When you think of a park, right, you think about greenery and grass and like activities to do. Our parks are not like that.
I grew up in that building right there. Usually I would be in this park when my dad would fix cars around here because he's a mechanic. Me and my brother would just play around here, ride our bikes. You hear a lot of dun-dun, dun-dun from the big trucks that carry the freights. I heard little honks. You know, when you blow your nose, it would come in like dirty when I would come back from playing in the park.
The Southside of Williamsburg is an environmental justice area, or an historically low-income and minority community that is disproportionately exposed to environmental harms and risks like poor air quality, extreme heat, and flooding. The open spaces that do exist are mostly concrete and metal, and located at the intersection of a major bridge and a major highway, where thousands of cars pass through daily.
We organize a group of young people from the community. We focus primarily on open spaces, parks, playgrounds, schools. And with this simple equipment, we kind of like track throughout the summer the peaks and the different flow of like air quality in this community. The study we did was with PM 2.5.
PM is short for particulate matter, a form of air pollution. And the kind that Stanley measured is less than 2.5 microns in diameter, or 1/100th the width of a human hair. PM 2.5 can travel deep into the lungs and enter the bloodstream, worsening lung and heart disease and leading to hospitalizations and premature deaths. Though levels of PM 2.5 have steadily declined in New York City since the 1970s, communities that are traffic heavy and lack green space, like the Southside of Williamsburg, get left behind. That's why in 2019, the community organization El Puente, in partnership with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, led students in a study of air contaminants in local parks and playgrounds. This is called citizen science, or scientific work done by members of the general public, often in collaboration with professional scientists.
This equipment right here, it kind of like filters the air and takes measurements of the pollutants that are in the air, the substances in the air. So like green is good, yellow is like we need to be concerned about it, and then red is like get out of here, like you cannot be breathing this air. During the summer and like at rush hour, we had numbers of like 50 that were like close to the reds right here in this park.
You know, me living here, I never knew the air quality was bad, and that might be a cause as to why my stamina runs low, why my mom has asthma, my sister has asthma as well.
Environmental justice comes out of a long tradition of recognizing that environmental pollution, for example, has been mostly cited in Black and brown communities in the United States.
Timon McPherson maps climate risks in New York to understand which neighborhoods are most at risk. He's found that low-income communities are the hottest and the most vulnerable to flooding.
We're observing more and more the way in which communities of color and low-income and immigrant communities are facing the deepest and most critical challenges of climate change.
Climate change makes extreme heat events more frequent and more intense. According to the CDC, more Americans die from heat waves than all other natural disasters combined. And people who live in cities, where natural land cover is replaced by surfaces that trap heat, are most at risk.
Over the summer, we were doing like a kind of like an experiment with heat and superficial temperature in the parks in this community. And we found that this park right here, People Park, as they call it, or the other side of LaGuardia, actually had the highest temperatures, up to 130 Fahrenheit.
Rising temperatures also means heavier rainfall, which causes flooding in cities because streets and sidewalks can't absorb the water.
In Jamaica, the flooding was so severe, it smashed a hole into this home's foundation.
We were inside when it happened.
Dylan Ramscreet managed to escape neck-deep waters, but his mom and brother, both immigrants from Trinidad, did not.
It's very, very sad, very sad.
One of the things I think we've realized is that cities and the way we've developed them over the last century in a very 20th century model isn't working when it comes to protecting everyone from climate change. But it's specifically not working for particular communities that have less green space or less natural areas and natural space.
Experts say those communities have less green space because of redlining, a 1930s housing policy that graded city neighborhoods on their quote-unquote mortgage security, based in part on the racial and ethnic identity of residents. This made it virtually impossible for people in certain communities, mostly African Americans and immigrants, to buy homes and build wealth that way. In the 1950s, large-scale projects like highways, freeways, industrial facilities, and public housing were most often built in redlined areas, which had the lowest land values. That's why the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, or the BQE, cuts through this part of Williamsburg, which was then one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city.
We see the legacy of this still in where people live in the city, where they live in New York City, where they live in many cities in the US. Black and brown people have lower quality housing, live in low elevation zones that are prone to flooding, and have also been places that have not been invested in for quality parks or even tree planting, which makes them hotter and less absorptive for when the rain falls.
In recent years, the Southside of Williamsburg has rapidly gentrified, bringing new residents and developments, but minimal public green space.
The challenges that we're facing are dramatic enough, and we're seeing them with recent storm events, that we need to be reinvesting in nature on every built surface and learning to create a different kind of city, one that's not just greener because it has less carbon emissions, but is fundamentally greener in the way in which nature is hybridized into the built fabric of the city. And some of that is going to be very expensive, but it's more expensive not to do it. We're seeing that with every storm that hits the city.
Green spaces naturally mitigate some of the environmental hazards that come with climate change. Trees and vegetation act as natural air conditioners by shading surfaces, deflecting radiation from the sun, and releasing moisture into the atmosphere. And soil can act as a natural sponge during storms. But green spaces also simply make neighborhoods more livable. They create pathways for local wildlife to pass through. They're associated with better mental health. And a recent study in Philadelphia suggests that greening neighborhoods makes residents feel safer overall. New York already has thousands of green infrastructure projects in place. These include rain gardens, or planted areas on the sidewalk that collect rainwater, and green roofs, a layer of vegetation installed on a rooftop.
It's important that now, more than ever, that cities like New York, as big as New York, are being aggressive in pushing back by pushing legislation that's going to ensure that our city is greener and playing a major role in the fight against climate change.
A year after that press conference, the city began requiring green roofs or solar panels on newly constructed buildings, following in the footsteps of other major U.S. cities like San Francisco, Denver, and Portland. But installation is expensive, and mapping studies show that green roofs are most common on New York's wealthiest blocks, or those that need them the least. Community gardens are often a more cost-effective solution, and New Yorkers have converted vacant lots into hundreds of them throughout the city.
So this is Espíritu Tierra, or Earth Spirit. It's El Puente's community garden. It was an abandoned lot back in the 90s that El Puente rescued in a way. At the time, it was just like a pile of trash. There was a lot of construction debris. There was a lot of trash from people in the community. It was like the dumping grounds of Southside of Williamsburg. And it's interesting because this place actually had the lowest concentration of PM 2.5 in our study. And it was also the place with the lowest temperature, like superficial temperature from that study that we also conducted.
In 2021, El Puente partnered with Pratt University students to map vacant lots in the neighborhood in the hopes of transforming them into community gardens. The maps also show local heat-related mortality risk, permeable land cover, and levels of PM 2.5.
Environmental justice is an issue that it can present itself in any city, any part of the world. It's important to make sure that you engage with the community members. Like, everything we did was because we were responding to people in the community, because they live here. Like, this is the air they're breathing. This is the parks that their kids are gonna be playing at. This is the places that they visit and they walk by every day. It's just a matter of people realizing the power that we do have and just like putting that out there, you know?